So thank you so much for that talk you gave. That was really interesting, and I
Yeah,
took some
really.
notes of things that I wanted to kind of bring up. But anything you want to talk about, we can talk about.
Well, gosh, I mean, there's so much in your work that's of interest to me. So I was looking at that entropy paper of yours, and there you kind of you hint at what your take on consciousness might be. So of course, I'm really interested in that. And yeah, hearing where you're going with that. So yeah, maybe you could tell me a bit more about that, and yeah, so that can be on the agenda as well. So
Sure, sure. Okay, that's great. I mean, okay, I guess we can do that first. I mean, so the big thing, of course, is that I have not up till now said very much about consciousness at all because I've tried to lay the foundation for kind of the easier aspect, which is still considered very weird, right? Is all these kind of third person cognition studies that we do in unfamiliar, unconventional embodiments. But I think now we can say some things, and I'm going to say some of these things in Greek, in Crete when I give my talk. I think a few things. I think first of all, if we make a list of the reasons for which we tend to attribute consciousness to each other, in other words, the problem of other minds, there are a few standard reasons. If you run through those reasons, it ends up that pretty much many organs and structures in your body meet all those criteria. So to whatever extent that we are willing to attribute based on behavior, so problem solving and valence and things like that, mechanism, the kinds of things that we know underlie cognition in the brain, evolutionary lineage, relationships, all these kinds of things, integrated information kind of metrics. All of those reasons should mean that you have to take very seriously the idea of consciousness in other parts of your body. And usually at this point, people say, "But I don't feel that my liver is conscious." Well, right, and you don't feel that I'm conscious either. Your left hemisphere puts up a very nice discussion about what it feels like for it to be conscious, but I think that in the absence of language, which we don't have evidence for in these other structures, but everything else is there. So I think we have to take that very seriously. And in fact, we are working on some tools to enable us to communicate with these other intelligences inside the body, so that we should be able to talk with language, with a translator interface made of AI and so on. We should be able to ask the liver questions about things it cares about, and how it's doing and its various goals and things like that.
okay, interesting. So that's a little bit like what I call engineering an encounter with
Mm-hmm.
these
Mm-hmm.
with these
Exactly.
things.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I might put things a little differently from you, because you talk about the reasons that we have for kind of the reasons that we have for ascribing consciousness to each other are also there, in these more exotic cases. But I think that I wouldn't quite put it that way, because I don't think we have reasons at all. I think we just
Mm.
do it, as it were. We just
Right.
treat each other as fellow conscious creatures, and it doesn't require reasons. And it's only when we put on a philosopher's hat that we start to think, what are the reasons, and
Yep.
so on.
Yep.
And we only and we put on a philosopher's hat, of course, when we're doing philosophy, because we might be interested in those meta level questions. But what is interesting at the moment, I think, is with the advent of AI, is it for, and also other forms of exotic consciousness, and you're raising a whole new kind of category, really. Is that then we're in the sort of territory where it doesn't come so naturally that we just do
Yes.
it,
Yes.
but then we have to ask ourselves these questions, and we step above this kind of inclination to our just natural inclinations to treat each other as fellow conscious creatures, which I think we also naturally do with other animals very often.
That's right.
And because we got these very exotic cases, then we have to take a step back, and then we're saying, well, is it conscious or is it not? And it becomes, so then you step outside of this just doing it into thinking about it, and
Yeah.
I always feel that that's where we can go wrong philosophically at the same time. But
Yeah. I completely agree with you. I don't think these are actually solid reasons to do it. They don't cross the chasm to first person experience. The reason that I emphasize them is I use them as tools to get people to revise people's intuitions. So as
Right.
weird as it is for you to think that your organs, but once you get there, if I can get you there with reasons, then after that maybe we can be a little more, we can widen our
Yeah,
the
yeah,
kinds of things that you're talking about, right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so that's the kind of more conventional aspect of it. The more crazy aspect of it, which is very out of favor, I think nowadays. This is now my model. In the biology that we do. The way that I crawled up to this, and this is decades of laboriously, doing work and then holding back the things that I kind of thought and wanted to say, but didn't want to say until we had the data. We increasingly have these remarkable forms and functions and behaviors in novel organisms that have never been here before. So the answer, while eons of selection is what accounts for, it doesn't hold anymore. And so now you have to ask the question, where do the goals and cognitive properties of completely novel beings come from? And I've started on the biological end, and the model that I've been pushing recently, and there's a chapter which I may have sent you, is basically this what I call this Platonic space model. And it's not, the idea is not to try to hew close to what Plato said. The only reason I stick with that name is because the mathematicians are already there, right? Is that they already think that there is a space of facts that are not fixed by physical properties of the universe that matter in the physical universe, but are not fixed by it. So this is what I'm going for. And roughly speaking, my view is that the contents of the patterns that are in that space, there are lots of low agency patterns that we recognize as facts about prime numbers and truths of number theory and things like that. But there are also very active high agency patterns that we would recognize as kinds of minds, behavioral propensities. And that basically when we make physical objects, be they robots, embryos, biobots, AIs, whatever we make, starting with simple mechanical things, and what we're really making are pointers into that space. We're making interfaces to patterns, and that what we fundamentally are not the physical embodiment. I don't think we don't make intelligence, we don't make consciousness. What we make are interfaces through which, if we know what we're doing, and I think most of the time we don't know what we're doing any more than we do when we make an embryo. It's like Dennett used to call it competence without comprehension. We can make these things, but we don't actually understand, right?
Yeah, like termite mounds and things, and
sorry, say that again.
Like termite mounds and things like that. So he kind of contrasts the termite mound with the Gaudi Cathedral, right? So,
Yeah. Well, that's right. And the thing with the cathedral is that it uses passive materials. So it's easy to do that when you have passive matter, but when you're dealing with agential matter, we're not good at knowing what we're going to get, what kind of ingressions. And so my view of consciousness at this point is that consciousness is the perspective of the pattern from that side. Right. When you are the pattern looking into the physical world through that interface, that is what we call first person experience and consciousness. And
right.
When the two bodies are looking at each other, this is the conventional person science that we all do. So
right,
that's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in fact, so in a sense, there isn't the. Now I suspect that there isn't there the kind of metaphysical commitments that bother me, the kind of sort of dualistic metaphysical commitments that bother me, right? So it's because I tend to want to back away from them, because you're providing a kind of a purely, it's a sort of what's the word? I was going to say mathematical description, but I guess it's on in the same space as a mathematical description of what goes on, right?
I mean, sort of. I'll sort of. I think I'll bite down on the dualism part because I suspect I do believe some things that would bother you on this side. I mean, I do think that this space is at least as real as the physical space. I don't think it's a metaphorical way of talking. I don't think it's, I don't like this business of emergence, which is basically just, we're going to catalog surprises and that's that. I think it's an ordered, structured space of patterns that functionally matter. I think they're causal in the physical world. I don't believe in physicalism anymore. I don't think the physical world is closed in that sense. And so I think some of those assumptions are probably there that you might not be happy with.
Right. So when we're saying that they're causally efficacious, these sort of somewhat high level patterns, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but that's not suggesting that they can't, as it were, be accounted for by what's going on at a lower level. I mean, we could, for example, simulate these things on a computer, right? And we'd be simulating them at a low level, and at the same time, there would be we might want to understand what goes on at a higher level. But the ontology we might choose to describe these things would be, we'd elect to use a higher level because it would actually be pretty incomprehensible if we actually spoke about it at this lower level. But nevertheless, there's a kind of causal closure there. It's not like there's something mysterious happening, right?
So I'm not. It's not a Mysterian position. So I'm not saying that they are somehow impossible to understand in a rational way. In fact, I think it actually is a much less Mysterian position than a lot of emergence. When I talk to people, I say, look at isn't this remarkable that this kind of thing? And people say, well, that's just something that holds in the physical world. Well, great, but I don't want a catalog of things that hold. I have a more optimistic view that these things are ordered and structured, and we can sort of study them and understand. But the thing is with a computational modeling, you can absolutely model it. But I think what you've then done is basically create a different kind of interface to the same pattern. So they're causal in the sense that, like, just imagine just a simple example. Let's say a world in which the highest fitness belongs to a certain kind of triangle. Okay. And so a certain shape of a triangle has the highest fitness. And so evolution cranks through a bunch of generations and gets the first angle right. And then it cranks through a bunch of other generations and gets the second angle right. Well, now you don't need to do the same thing for the third angle. There's this magical free lunch that you get that the third angle, and you don't need to evolve it. And it's practical. It's causal in the sense that evolution can exploit the hell out of these things because they provide these kind of free lunches, things you don't have to then evolve directly. And it isn't mysterious. It's not mysterious because you can reproduce it as much as you want and you can study it. In fact, that's what I think we should be doing, is trying to understand what interfaces will cause what patterns to come down. I think we actually only understand that in very small set of cases. But it is kind of magical in the sense that I don't think we have a good vocabulary for it. This isn't some weird thing that sneaks in through the quantum, the interface. Like even in Newton's deterministic universe, you already have this.
Yes, right. Sure. Okay, yeah. So I often in my head I think about patterns that I see in water, in sort of vortices, and especially walking out in the countryside. We have some small streams near where I live, and you can walk out and you can see sometimes when there's been a heavy rainfall, you can see particular vortices form, and it's quite interesting because they'll form a particular vortex, and they'll form and then they'll disappear again, and sometimes two will form and then merge and then disappear again, and so I often think that perhaps that's an example of the sort of thing that you're talking about, because it's a sort of self-sustaining pattern, but on a certain level, of course, it's all just water, right? But the pattern is is indisputably a real thing, and if you might get caught in the vortex, or some stick will get caught in the vortex, and so on a certain level of description, you certainly want to talk about the vortex as a thing, right? So is that a reasonable, is that a good analogy for you?
I think I'm saying something more radical than that. I mean, I agree with everything you said here, but I think I'm saying something a little stronger than
that. Let me guess, because I think you want to so I'm talking about like an everyday phenomenon that confronts me, whereas you want to link it to the kind of Platonic object of possible vortices or vortex-like patterns, right? In as it were, in the Platonic realm of possible patterns. Is that, because when you talk about an interface, is that what were you about to say?
Pretty much. It's that many times in biology and no doubt physics as well. When you start chasing down the explanation for why is this or that happening, eventually you'll reach things like, well, because that's the distribution of primes. That's why. and right, or that's the Fibonacci, that's how the Fibonacci series shakes out, right?
Right.
And those kinds of things, right? You've now left it's not a physics explanation, it's not a historical evolutionary story of selections. You've now gone into this other, right? And we're pretty comfortable doing that for math, but I think we're going to find the exact same thing. Why does a Xenobot do these weird things that no other creature on Earth has done? For the sake, it's haunted by these patterns the same way that triangles are haunted by the rules of geometry and so on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So does this connect with like Turing's ideas of morphogenesis and
I think so. So Turing, it's amazing. He actually said some very prescient things on this matter, and then of course, he didn't live long enough, unfortunately, to follow it up. But I think he was interested in this is a guess. I think he was interested in self-organization of morphogenesis because he saw that symmetry between the self-creation of bodies in embryogenesis and the autopoiesis of minds. That there are underlying patterns. I mean, I think he would have been all over this stuff if he had lived. I think he was going there.
And, and certainly, it's what I guess what struck me is in describing your thinking was that I'm pretty sure that Turing saw, as it were, the mathematical realm as being as constraining what was possible in physical reality, and then seeing that manifest in these actual patterns, right? And we see that, yeah.
I mean, constraints. You're absolutely constraints, but I think it's not just the flip side of that is because they are in a sense free lunches for a lot of things that biology wants to do. They're also enabling, so voltage gated ion channels, right? It's basically as soon as you've found your evolution, you find a protein that's a voltage gated ion channel. That's an ion. That's a voltage gated current conductance. That's a transistor. You have two of them. Now you've got a logic gate. Now you have a truth table. Did you need to evolve the truth table? You didn't. You just get it. And the fact that NAND is special and all these other things. Just boom, now you've made that interface. You didn't have to evolve any of this stuff. It's you get it for free, and now you can do all these amazing things, right? So constraints, but also enabling, enabling steps.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Right. Very good. Yeah. So tell me what else I should because your oeuvre is quite big and varied, and as mine is, in fact. I mean, I realize that it's quite difficult for people to know where I'm coming from in a way, because I've got all this history of stuff, and people tend to latch onto the wrong things, and I despair of it. They look at something I wrote 15 years ago and they think that's what, or it's kind of frustrating. And I think you're probably in a similar position in a way, right? So that entropy paper was great, but where else should tell me where else I should look? Yeah, what would
I mean, I can send you a few of the key latest. I actually have on my website, a kind of a map of this. It's like a skeleton with the main, sort of backbone of like the main theory papers, and then a bunch of stuff that kind of hangs off of it, with details. Okay. So I can send you some of those things. There's a few pieces that are important. I mean, maybe I'll just link this back to some things you said in your talk. One really interesting aspect had to do with disembodied consciousness, right? And so one interesting thing we should think about, I think, is that we as humans, I think, are super fixated on the three-dimensional space and movement as embodiment. But long before muscle came on the scene, biology was navigating all kinds of weird spaces that are hard for us to visualize. So metabolic space, physiological state space, transcriptional space, anatomical morphospace, which is what we study all the time. Only after that did it get to muscles and movement in 3D space. So that loop, perception, decision, action, memory in the middle, all these things, living things carry those out in all kinds of crazy spaces all the time. They navigate intelligently, they solve problems, and so I think we need to be really careful with this idea of disembodiment, because if people say this about organoids in a dish, they say, well, it's disembodied. It is not disembodied. That thing is navigating who knows how many spaces that we can barely sort of visualize. Yeah. And it makes me very nervous to talk about, and I don't have any special claims about language models or anything, but it makes me very nervous to talk about software in a box as disembodied, because we are also very bad at recognizing embodiment and living things, which takes place and I think these other spaces are, again, as real, in terms of consciousness studies, as real as 3D space.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I guess when when I talk about disembodiment, I do have something specific in mind. So I do kind of flesh it out in terms of broadly, human-like worlds, of 3D worlds that we comprising, objects that are, that are 3D spatially extended in 3 dimensions and so on. I mean, that's the way I'm defining disembodiment in the context of the discussion that I want to have. And of course, so I think a lot of my work is all about, my current work. It's very interesting to talk to you about this, because it's all about trying to, as it were, navigate, to use that word again, to navigate. It's funny because we use these spatial metaphors all the time, to navigate a funny kind of territory which is between the familiar and the very unfamiliar. And how can we negotiate this boundary, right? Because part of the way I think in terms of philosophy is that our language is just to some degree is constrained by what is familiar, and
Yep.
So if you stray too far, you're from what's very familiar, then you're actually moving beyond the bounds of our current language.
Yep.
And so we can't just, so now of course we can push the boundaries, right? So as soon as we think about weird things like large language models and so on, then we're starting to kind of push the boundaries in interesting ways. But it's quite difficult to kind of jump all the way out of that into kind of like
exactly.
really. So I guess that's how maybe I relate to what you're talking about. So I can, so sure, I can 100% go with you on what you're saying. But I'm kind of coming at it without wanting to jump too far too quickly.
Sure.
And interesting. But we're interested in. I think we're interested in the kind of exotic, right?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in kind of like moving there in a slightly more conservative way, maybe.
Which I understand completely, and this is why I try to set this up in cells and tissues, because I think it's a stepping stone, right? So I agree with you. I'm not jumping. I have zero claims about what language model, what space they're working in. I don't know anything about that. But what I do want to get people used to is to think about a semi-alien thing, which is, it's not terror, like it's part of your own body. It's not that crazy, but and yet there, so we can define. So as you say, language is critical. So what do I mean by navigation? Well, we can define things like your current position, the position you would like to be in, the effectors that you have for moving in that space, the sensors you have for sensing states in that space, the barriers that you might encounter that you can't get past, other agents that you might encounter that are not just fixed features of the environment. But all of these things can be defined in all these weird spaces. So we can talk about what a metamaterial means in transcriptional space, or what a barrier means in physiological space, or what does it mean to have misperceptions, visual illusions, to be confused, to have memories, to long-term planning. We can do all of these things in these other crazy spaces. And I feel like once we get a handle on what it means for a cell to be navigating transcriptional space and using intelligence to do so, and to have mistaken beliefs about that space and all these kinds of things, we will be, I think, in a better shape to jump or decide not to jump into these kinds of ideas for AIs.
Right. Yeah, because that gives us a larger framework onto which we can try and map.
That's right, and see how well it goes, and see how well it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, that's really, really interesting. And it does fit with the kind of what I see as the kind of large scale cultural social agenda that we have to pursue, which is to figure out how to accommodate ourselves to these strange mind-like things. They're mind-like. And we need new conceptual tools for doing that, right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
so that fits in very well. Yeah, and and who knows how it got. I mean, what I'm always saying is that I don't know where this conversation is going to go. Right?
That's right.
We have to wait. I at the same time I consider myself to be kind of like a commentator on the conversation. Saying it's just, and that's a kind of meta-philosophical position of sort of saying it's just a conversation and trying to push back on people who are overly metaphysical about it. So, but then I also participant in the conversation as well. So I have kind of preferences, and kind of certainly I would have been a bit conservative about embodiments and the whole engineering and encounter thing. So that's me kind of participating in the conversation by introducing my own kind of little bit of vocabulary. But I'm not committed to that on the higher level. On the higher level, what we need is more and more radical, ways of talking that we can bring into this conversation.
Yeah, I agree with that strongly. I think there are sometimes people, even philosophers, will contact me and say, you commit a category error. When you talk about cells learning, and well, where did these categories come from? We got them a couple thousand years ago, and you just want to stick with it, and we never question them, right? So I think the categories need to evolve with the science, and this is. If we can't figure this out for our own cells and organs, the hope of figuring out for aliens, the AIs, cyborgs, whatever, is slim. We need to be able to handle this. That's my position. So I'm trying to build a bridge to some of these things.